All right, how's it going, everyone? Gamma Fighter here, coming at you with another Sylvaneth video. And in this video, we've got a spreadsheet open, so you know what that means. It means we're going to be crunching some numbers. We're going to be digging in deep. It means we're going to be doing a deep dive, and this time we're doing a deep dive into the magic that is available to Sylvaneth. I've got my trusty 2d6 roll table here to help us out. It's going to help a whole lot because we got a lot to cover. So magic is really weird. It's really interesting because the opponent is going to have a chance to unbind your spell if you successfully cast it. But the unbind roll is the goal to hit on the unbind roll is based on what you rolled for the casting roll. So the it's a moving target that you can't just easily calculate what the odds are of casting a spell if the opponent has a chance to unbind. So I think I figured out a solution, but I am not a statistician. I'm not probabilities. They can be counterintuitive sometimes, but I think I figured it out. So here's what we do. All right, to calculate a 6-up, which we got right here, we just take the chance to roll exactly 6, the chance to roll exactly 7 and 8, and so on through 12, add them up, and it's about 72%, and that's what we get here as well. There's some rounding errors and stuff like that, but it's fine. It doesn't make a big difference. So my thought was, well, if if we know what the chances are of the rolling a 6, if you're casting a spell that casts on a 6, we know what the odds are to roll exactly a 6, and then we know what the odds are that the opponent can unbind, because if you roll a 6, they have to roll a 7-up, which they have a 58.33% chance of rolling. So what we can do is we can take those, and then we can multiply the chance that you rolled 6 exactly, multiply it by the chance that your opponent fails to unbind, and we come out with this equation here, and it comes out to 5.78%. If you're rolling 2 dice, trying to cast a spell that casts on a 6, you get 6 exactly, and your opponent doesn't unbind, there's a 5.78% chance of that happening. We do the same thing with all the numbers, 7 through 12, and we get this. On a 6-up, you've got about a 50.5% chance to successfully cast it without it getting unbound. On a 7-up, it's a almost 45% chance, and on 8-up, it's a 35% chance. I'm pretty sure that works. So let me know if I got that wrong, all you statisticians that are watching this, and I'll just delete the video, no problem, no hard feelings. But for now, we're going to roll with this because I think that's the math. So now, the thing is, you don't just roll with no bonus. Sometimes you get a -1 to cast, like if you're casting during your opponent's turn, and sometimes you get a +1 to cast, like a L'Ariel, or if you have Spell Singer on something. So we have to figure that out. But I was thinking at first, if we're looking at a 7-up, if you get +1 to cast, well, just use the numbers from the 6-up. So it would just be like a 6-up, you got a 50% chance. But no, that's not accurate. It's actually quite a bit better if you get a +1 to cast. So if you're rolling a 7 with a +1 to cast, then it's actually easier than a 6-up with no bonus, and I'll show you why. But first, actually, the more important thing I wanted to cover too was that this is actually a pretty low chance on the 6-up. Before I did this, I was actually kind of thinking that a 6-up is pretty consistent because I was mostly looking at without the chance to be unbound. And like 72% is almost 3/4 of chance. And like, that's really good. So I wasn't worried about that. But the truth is, if your opponent has a chance to unbind, it's like a 50% chance. And that's a coin flip. And in a tactics game where you're trying to get every advantage and reduce your variance as much as possible, then 50% is just not good enough. It's just a touch better than a coin flip. So that's really interesting too. And yeah, we'll get into it when we look at the spells that cast on a 6. Speaking of which, all of our spells cast on 6, 7, or 8. They actually all cast on 6 or 7, but then the manifestation lores, Purple Sun and the Kronspine cast on an 8. The Burning Head casts on a 5, but I didn't really want to do all the work to put the numbers in just for the Burning Head. It's reliable. Maybe someone could calculate that, but I just didn't want to do it. I already spent like a really long time putting this together too. So anyways, not that I'm complaining. So looking here, this is what it looks like if you have a +1 bonus. All right, so this is the same table. I just included 5 and changed things up a little bit. So when you're looking for a 6-up, you can succeed on a 5. So I've included a 5 here. So normally when you roll a 5, your opponent can unbind with a 6-up, right? So they got a 72% chance to unbind. But You didn't actually roll a 5. You got 5 on the dice, but the total modified roll was a 6. That means the opponent has to unbind on a 7 up, which is a 58% chance, which is actually quite a bit less likely to happen. Still, better than a coin flip for them to unbind, but it's a lot better than 72%. So for the 5 up, or for the roll of 5, I put the unbind chance at the 7 up unbind, and we get this number. And then I did the same thing. Everything's shifted a little bit. So when you roll 6 on the dice, your opponent has to roll an 8 up. So it's 41%, and so on. And we get down to these two. If you roll an 11 on the dice, you actually got a 12. Your opponent's not capable of unbinding. I know in the old world, if you get a double 6 on an unbind roll, then it automatically succeeds. But I'm pretty sure that's not how it works in 4th edition for Sigmar. So for these two, like your opponent just doesn't get a chance to unbind, which is interesting. So the 6 up that we had before went from a 50% chance to a 63% chance. That's a pretty big improvement from the +1 to cast, because you're getting 2 bonuses. You're adding 5 as a result. That's a successful result. And then you're reducing the power of their unbinds. Their unbinds are all getting worse relative. So actually these unbinds are the same, but it's shifted because they have to roll a 7 to unbind your 5, just like I already explained. So that's really interesting. And then that means that a -1 to cast is even worse than you might think intuitively. And for the reverse effect. So not only do you have a higher target to hit, you're losing out on 6 being a successful roll. So you have fewer successful rolls, but also your opponent has easier unbinds. So normally for your 7 up, your opponent has to roll, or on a 7, if you roll a 7, your opponent has to roll an 8 up, which is 41%. But actually, because you're at -1, if you roll a 7, that counts as a 6. Your opponent just has to roll a 7 up, which is quite a bit easier. So the 50% on a 6 up goes down to about 38%, which is, again, quite a bit worse. So we're going to look at all that combined here in this little chart down here, where it summarizes it all here. So we've got the 6 up, the 7 up, and the 8 up. We've got if you got a -1, if you have no bonus, if you have +1. And then the difference here on the left side, we've got the difference between the -1 compared to neutral. And then on the right side, we've got the +1 compared to neutral. And we can see these are pretty substantial increases in your percentage to be successful. And especially when you look at the percentage of the percentage. So like this is the raw. On the 8 up here, the having +1 to cast, you have about a coin flip, about a 50% chance, whereas with no bonus, you've got a 35% chance. And this is all, once again, when the opponent has a chance to unbind. So that's 15% difference, but that's 50 minus 35 is 15. But the 15% is actually like almost half of the 35%, if that makes sense. You're getting like 50% more likely to succeed with the +1 bonus. So it kind of like how if you go from a 6 up ward save to a 5 up ward save, now you have twice as many successes. So a 5 up ward save is like twice as good as a 6 up ward save. It's kind of similar here where like you're getting a 50% bonus on your casting, essentially, which is really, really interesting. The other thing to note is that it's so powerful that actually, sorry, 1 second, clear my throat here. Oof, sorry about that. The chance to successfully cast an 8 up spell with a +1 bonus is the same as the chance to cast a 6 up spell with no bonus. They're both about 50%. That is like really huge because the difference between 6 up and 8 up is very big. Just looking at the raw chance to roll 6 or higher compared to 4 or to 8 or higher, it's like a 30% difference. But you just demolish that when you account for unbinds and then this +1 to cast. Very interesting stuff. I know I learned a lot looking at this magic, and I hope you guys are appreciating this too. So let's shift modes a little bit here. We're going to take a look at the spells that we have available to us, and then the priority. So we've got the casting roll here, so that brings into effect the stuff we looked at before, and then we're going to put it all together, as well as the damage capabilities in the next part. So first of all, this is a disclaimer. I've got sort of a guideline, a priority of when you should use these spells. The thing is, there are essentially infinite possibilities, like possible layouts that you can have during a game of Age of Sigmar, and I can't possibly account for, 10% of them. So what I'm going to do is talk in sort of general things that you should be thinking about when you're in your hero phase. You've got a couple of spells to cast, and you're thinking about what you should do. Um, this will hopefully help you think about some of the things that we should be thinking about before actually choosing what spells to cast. So the first one is Tree Song. This is the one where we can summon Awakened Wildwood. We've got the details here if you want to read them, but this is more just for a reference. So the priority I have here is I say you should probably cast it until you have 3, because the maximum Awakened Wildwoods we can have out on the table is 3. And they turn on our faction traits. So our faction traits are healing, our walk the hidden path teleport, and our strike and fade teleport. Those are all our faction traits, and they don't work unless you have Awakened Wildwoods out. So we're at a serious handicap if we don't have any Awakened Wildwoods out. Now, there's some caveats though. I got some notes here. Some things to consider. The opponent can charge Awakened Wildwoods now. Even though it's terrain, it's faction terrain, which means that they can charge it. So which means that it can really help them out. So for example, they can charge into the Awakened Wildwood, and then they can get on a point. They can charge the Awakened Wildwood, and then they can pile in and then get on a point that way. They can charge the Awakened Wildwood, and then they can pile into your units, and you effectively shortened their charge by 2 or 3 inches, which is a really big deal when you have to roll 2 less on this result or more table here for the 2d6 roll. So it can be a real detriment. It can really help your opponent if you put the Awakened Wildwoods in a wrong place. So when you're considering casting this spell and the place that you would want to put it, this is probably the most important thing to think about. Does this help my opponent more than it helps me? The other thing is, these are really helpful for helping you complete battle tactics. So if this is a core part of your strategy for this turn to complete a battle tactic, yeah, you're pretty much going to want to cast this. And it's an unlimited spell, so you can have multiple allies or multiple wizards attempt to cast it. So you may want to have you may want this to be one of your early spells that you attempt to cast, so that if you fail it, then you can have another wizard cast it later as well. So you'll know, don't save it for your last spell, basically. Another thing to consider, it's cast on a 6 up, which means even if your opponent has an unbind, then you have about a 50% chance of getting this off, which means if you do have 2 wizards and you attempt to cast it twice, most of the time you're going to be able to get at least one of those successful, which is great, even if your opponent attempts to unbind both times. Very good. Some other things to consider. Does this give you a bonus that you want or need for this turn? So Spirit of Durthu gets +1 to hit, I think, on his attacks. Yeah. And I think on his sword, his good attack. The Dryads are -1 to be hit and -1 to be wounded, which is really powerful. It turns them from just the worst chaff unit in the game to one of the best tar pits in the game. So really difficult to get rid of. So if you really need to like lock down an opponent or defend a point or something like that, hold the line, screen something, and you need those Dryads to live, at least some of them, then you may want to put that Awakened Wildwood down, because without it, they are trash. Okay, and then consider Walk the Hidden Paths or Strike and Fade. Especially Strike and Fade, I think people don't really think about, because Walk the Hidden Paths will happen in the next phase, the movement phase, right after your hero phase, but Strike and Fade will happen after combat. And it's important to consider what options that enables for Strike and Fade, as well, especially for things like setting up for doing a tactic this turn, as well as setting up to do a tactic for the next turn. So yeah, consider these things when you're thinking about it. I think a lot of the times, if you don't have 3 Awakened Wildwoods out, then it's going to be a good choice to cast Tree Song. But of course, there's a lot of different things to consider there. So pretty high priority for that one. The next spell is the one that gives us where we target an Awakened Wildwood and give allies +1 to rend when wholly within 6. So this is only useful when there is an enemy available for it. Kind of, asterisk. It's really difficult to talk in absolutes in Age of Sigmar because there's just so many different scenarios that you could come across. So the limitation on this is that it only works on allies that are wholly within up 6 inches of a particular awakened wildwood. And there's going to be a lot of times where that just doesn't matter because the there's no opponents that are within range where you could be in combat with them and still be wholly within 6 inches of any of your awakened wildwoods. However, you do need to consider using it defensively. So getting back to the dryads, maybe not, well, dryads are a bad example because they're not doing any damage, whether they have rend or not. But if you need to lock down a point, you need to protect it, you need to defend it for whatever reason. You just screen out some units maybe. But you've got a unit that you're not planning on moving from where they are right now on your turn. Maybe an example would be something like Kurnoth Bow Hunters. They may be protecting something like a Warsong Revenant, but they can still do stuff without having to move from where they are. Anyways, I'm getting to way too specific of a scenario. But the point is, where you can cast this, it goes away at the start of your next turn, which means that if your opponent's going to be going next, then they may want to charge into that unit. But if the unit has +1 to rend, it'll really help them be stronger defensively, as well as you can use this by you can cast this during your opponent's turn to in a place where you know that they're going to want to go and you already have units, and it makes that the unit that's there much more prickly defensively. And so if you cast this once during your turn and then once during your opponent's turn, and you've got two trees that are activated with +1 to rend, then it makes a really difficult situation when your opponent is picking activations, especially if they don't have strike first. One of their units is going to get hit back pretty hard. So it can be a powerful defensive tool to really give your opponent no good choices. And I love giving my opponents no good choices. So just some things to consider. I think this one may be a little bit overlooked on defense, and maybe that's why I'm emphasizing it so much. Look for those opportunities where you can kind of trap your opponent, where you can make a unit more deadly than they were expecting when they pick their battle tactic, for example. All right, then Dwellers Below. So this one is dependent on the positioning of yourself, of the Awakened Wildwood. I say yourself, I meant the wizard, your units, the Awakened Wildwoods, and the enemy units especially. So because of the limitation on the casting range, then it's going to kind of pick for you whether you can use it. So that's an easy way to eliminate needing to choose this one. You may want to consider this one first so you can maybe easily eliminate it and say, nah, it's just not an option. You can also combo this with Tree Song. You target within 6 inches of an Awakened Wildwood, and then Awakened Wildwoods only have to be placed outside of 3 inches from enemy units. So you could feasibly put down an Awakened Wildwood that is within 6 inches of the target that you want to hit. Now, this is one of those horde clearing spells, so we're going to look at the damage specifics later, but it is better when you're targeting things that have a lot of models, obviously. So if you're up against something like Sylvaneth, where maybe they don't have any dryads and everything's in units of 3, 6, or 1, this might be one that you can kind of write off pretty easily because it's not going to do very much damage. But yeah, other than that, that's pretty much the most important things to consider there. Also, I guess you could consider that it is on a 7-up, which is a little bit more difficult to cast. So you may want to, if you have more spell casts than your opponent has unbinds, you may want to play a little bit of bluffing with them about saving this for later so that maybe they forget about it if it's going to be a good spell for you. And maybe they blow all their unbinds before you even try to cast this. So yeah, okay, moving on. We're going to take a look at Alariel, and Metamorphosis is a pretty good damage spell. 2d3 damage on average is about 4 damage. Again, we'll get into the damage calculations a little bit later. You're not super dependent on the secondary effect of activating Tree Song, so you're really just looking at the damage that this can do, and it's pretty reliable chip damage. I say every time, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. Alariel has 3 casts, and there's going to be like it's going to be pretty common where neither Wrathful Spirits nor Dwellers Below is going to be a really good choice. So you may cast Tree Song, and then you kind of have a choice between casting something from, say, Morbid Conjuration, like one of our manifestations, or just casting, well, I guess I should say casting two of these manifestations, or just using Metamorphosis and one manifestation. So um, yeah, it depends on the goals for that turn and what you're trying to do, but this is pretty good chip damage, and if you cast this every turn, it can be pretty reliable to yeah, wear some stuff down. And probably what I'm beating around the bush is Alarielle, for the point cost that she doesn't do a ton of damage, so this is one way to make up for that little bit lower damage that she has. Right, the Lady of Vines has her War Scroll spell, Aspect of the Everqueen. This is her ward spell. You could cast this every time. I could even say actually every time, because this one you really would every time you want to cast it. She's got two spell casts. You're using one of them on this, because most of the time this is why you brought her. So again, to consider, this is cast on a 7 up. So if your opponent has one unbind available, and it's very difficult for the Lady of Vines to get +1 to cast. So you're looking at just under a coin flip. And it's funny, actually, when I did the War Scroll review, which you should watch if you haven't seen it yet, I think I said that I consider it basically a little bit less than a coin flip, whether you're going to be able to successfully cast this or not. And like, that's what it is. So that's pretty good intuition from me. Um, but I have heard people say that this is not Lady of Vines is not good because you're never going to succeed on casting this. Really, you're going to succeed about 45% of the time. And it's just a question of whether that's enough for you. There's 5 rounds in a game. If you aren't casting this during your opponent's turn, then you're going to succeed on it 2 or 3 times. And again, the question is that good enough? That's for you to decide. All right, for Drika, she can give bonus to hit, and for her spites and twist wield, she can give +1 to wound as well. But the only target is infantry. So I said it's complicated. There's a lot of aspects to consider. And I probably should have touched on this actually with Wrathful Spirits as well. The question is whether this will get you over the finish line for finishing off a unit. You could give +1 rend, but if you are doing a unit of reinforced Kurnoth hunters with great swords and they're charging a unit of tree revenants that's not reinforced, they have no defensive bonus, no ward, no nothing. You don't need rend to finish them off. And the same way you wouldn't need a +1 to hit, although yeah, from Drika here. So that's something you definitely want to consider. And if you brought Spite Revenants and Twist Wield, then you probably brought it for this synergy, or you brought Drika for this synergy. But this is kind of part of the reason I don't like Drika in 4th edition, even though she was my favorite hero in 3rd edition. I know I like the Lady of Vines more, but Drika was just kind of an auto include, is what I mean for me. Um, the the reason that a big reason I don't like it is because her spell is just very situational. And it's really questionable how much it benefits. Uh, Another example would be like that uh, Spite Revenants, especially against stuff with a lot of really good armor, Spite Revenants are doing most of their damage through the crit mortals that they have. Something with 2 or 3 armor, you're still not going to get much through. Uh, Even if you get +1 to hit and +1 to wound, not a lot is getting through there anyways. Most of it's going to be the crit mortals that you have. So it can help, but it's not going to take you from, barely scratching some, a unit of Chaos Knights or something to like clearing them out. It's like, I would be pretty surprised if a reinforced unit of Spite Revenants even got 1 additional kill because on a knight, because a Chaos Knight, because of this spell. You know what I mean? So it's sort of weird where like there's gonna be times where it's overkill and there's gonna be times where it's just not enough, and it only targets infantry. So it's really complicated. She only has 1 spell cast. So if you need to get off Tree Song or something, then it, she just can't cast it anyway. So it's kind of complicated with Draca. So yeah, I think that's enough time on that. All right, then finally, the last spell we have is the Warsong Revenant's War Scroll spell, Unleash Swarm of Spites. Also cast on a 7-up, and this is his new Warsong Bomb, not nearly as good. Uh, the old Warsong Bomb in third edition, not to digress too much, it was much more like the Dwellers Below spell, except it could target multiple units. But you really loved, no, well, that's right. It didn't, we did have Dwellers Below. Now I'm getting them all confused. Anyways, disregard that. Um, the old Warsong Bomb also wanted to hit as many units as possible, and this new one does the same thing. You want to hit as many units as possible. It's just not as powerful. It's the D3 and 2-up does damage. Um, you can also pair this with the Tree Song combo, where you can drop a tree within 3 inches, and then you can you can cast the Warsong Bomb on it. We'll look at the damage. This is one of, this and the Wrath or the Dwellers Below are the two best damaging spells for the Warsong Revenant. When I did the Lady of Vines Warsong comparison, which you should watch, I'm not going to say pachow, but you may see a title or a card come up on the screen for you to click the link. When I did that comparison, one thing I pointed out was that the Lady of Vines has a little bit of combat, one shooting attack. It's not great, but it's something at least. She's not completely useless in combat like the Warsong Revenant is. And I sort of got me wondering, so where does the Warsong is the Warsong just support, or does the damage kind of make up for his lack of combat damage? So I guess we'll take a look at the damage a little bit more, but this is kind of what got me thinking on this. So yeah, if you can hit 2 or 3 units, it may be a good idea. And the role of this spell, though, is chip damage. Once again, it's 2 or 3 damage or 0 damage. So you're not going to be wiping out whole units in one go with this, but it can really soften things up so that you have a little bit easier of a time finishing things off. Another thing, considering all these different sources of chip damage that we have, um, that one of the videos we looked at recently was comparing Sylvaneth units to similar units in other factions, and the Spite Rider Lancers, spoiler, but the Spite Rider Lancers really are pretty weak compared to a lot of other cavalry in the game. They're still a good option for us because they are our fastest hammer. Um, and they don't drop off that much in damage from the Kurnoth Hunters, which are our best just generic hammer. But they, in the trade-off, they get a lot of speed. So one way you could, if you are running a list with Spite Rider Lancers instead of Kurnoth Hunters, you can make up for that by including these spellcasting units that can do these chip damage effects to make it easier to clear out and finish units off. All right. Okay, moving on. This is more of just a reference. These are the more popular manifestations. I didn't want to just show all of them because there are a lot. Once again, I did do a video looking at, I actually did 2 videos looking at the different manifestations we have access to and what roles they might play. These are the ones that I said were probably the best, and these seem to be the ones that people are using. Although I did say I don't really like the Sylvaneth ones. I do see people using those still too. Those all cast on a 7 as well. The big ones are the Morbid Conjuration and the Primal Energy, with the occasionally people will run Aetherrot Machineries for the cogs, which can give Alariel -1 to be hit, which is really strong on such a tanky unit with a ton of absolute ton of healing that she has available to her. So yeah, there's a little reference for you. Now we get down to the damage chart. So here's where we're combining everything together. We've got, this is the with unbinds table. We've got the no unbinds down below, but first we'll look at the with unbinds. So I've got spells here. The Dwellers Below, it does different damage based on how many models in the target unit. We got Metamorphosis. We've got Unleash Swarm of Spites, the Warsong's War Scroll spell. This does more damage the more units that you can hit. And then I've got these manifestations just as representative manifestations, just for your reference, as a comparison here. I'm not going to include the damage that they do because that just is way too complicated. do you count the turn that you summon them? Do you count it as though they're going to survive the rest of the game? Do you just count the wounds that they or the health that they bring in that your opponent has to remove? I'm not even going to get into that. I just included this as a reference so you can see how easy it is to cast compared to other spells. Um, I included the Tree Lord's ability here. It's just more mortal chip damage, and it's another source of damage. The Tree Lord almost costs as much as Spirit of Durthu, and does like the Spirit of Durthu does just so much damage, and the Tree Lord really doesn't. So I wanted to see how big of an impact this um, ability is in helping make up for the damage that it loses compared to the Spirit of Durthu. And then, of course, we got the Awakened Wildwoods. They have an ability to deal mortal damage to enemies that are near them. So just thought I'd throw that in there too. So getting into this, the range here, we've got some weird ranges because it is based on where Awakened Wildwoods are sometimes. So I didn't even consider that. I just put in the ranges as regular numbers for easy reference. I've got the casting rolls here. And then we've got the chance to cast if we have a -1 to cast, our chance to cast if we have a no bonuses, and our chance to cast if we have a +1. What happened here? How did these numbers change? Hold on one second. All right, sorry about that. I went ahead and fixed the numbers. This is another one of those videos. I spent a couple days kind of putting everything together and thinking through what I wanted to talk about. And at some point, I may have just changed this number, but I double checked everything on here and it is correct. I can't really vouch for the down here, but yeah. So up here, we're good to go on the unbinds table. So then I took the damage or the chance to cast, multiplied it by the damage of the ability, and that gives us our average damage. So the average damage you would expect um, baked in with the chance that the spell actually succeeds. So um, it's not a perfect thing, but it is a good uh, proxy for a way that you can think about these spells. So for example, and man, this got a little bit wide. Let me see if I can zoom out. I hope it's still a little clear for you guys. I know it gets like really small when I zoom out like that. But so when you're casting Metamorphosis, on average, you're rolling 2d3, so on average you're looking at 4 damage. But this is taking into account you've only got a 45% chance of casting it in the first place. Or if you give her this is a Lariel's spell, if you give her +1 to cast, then when you consider that you've got a 58% chance, you multiply that by the 4 damage, it's about 2.33 damage every time you attempt to cast the spell. Though, of course, if you cast it, you're either doing 0 or you're doing 2d3, right? So there we go. Um, sorry, this Dwellers Below is out of order here. I really, I just apologize for that. But we can take a look at the average damage that we're looking at. We can look at Dwellers Below, ideal scenario, you're hitting something with 20 models, doing the maximum damage possible. Then, the raw damage that you would expect is 6.67, but when you factor in the chance to cast, we're looking at about 3 damage with no bonus. But with the bonus, you get almost up to 4. It just makes it that much more reliable. Um, this is why I do like Spell Singer as a heroic trait. I think it really helps out um, with the damage output of capabilities, but also as well with like the consistency of putting out things like Tree Song or adding +1 rend, that type of stuff. So there's a kind of a lot to take in here. I don't want to just read every single one, but kind of taking a look at some notable ones. Um, the I think I don't think most of the time you're going to want to cast Dwellers Below on something with 5 models or even 6 models, but it's around 2 damage if you do succeed. So with a 45% chance to cast, you're looking at about 1 damage. So yeah, Dwellers Below, not great unless you really have a good target, like with 20 models. For the Warsong Revenant, I think this is a big one because he doesn't really do damage otherwise. He's just kind of a ward aura and a spellcaster. So can he make up for the damage? Well, not really. You give him a +1 to cast on Unleash and you can hit 2 units, then you're looking at about 2 damage. If you can hit 3 units, it's about 3 damage. Uh, That's not great because it's kind of spread out too, right? So yeah, I'm not in love with it. And then the I think for the manifestations, I think this really highlights just how difficult it is when you're casting on your opponent's turn. You got a -1 to cast. Um, for one thing, they will always have an unbind if they have any unbinds at all, because when you're casting during their turn, they haven't used any of their unbinds, and you only get one chance to cast. So they'll pretty much always have an unbind, unless it's a faction that just doesn't have the ability to unbind, or they didn't bring the ability to unbind whatsoever. Um, so if you can have a +1 to cast, when you're casting in your opponent's turn, you'll be in the neutral zone here. And then something that casts on a 6, you've got actually about a 50% chance to cast it, even with their ability to unbind. Like, that's pretty good. Or even something like the Gravetide, which is pretty powerful. You have just under a coin flip, you got a 45% chance to cast. I think that's pretty good. And I think these numbers kind of can help us make better decisions here. Um, and yeah, the Purple Sun as well, you got a 23% chance compared to a 35% chance. 35% is like quite a lot better. And if you don't have the +1 to cast, so you're just at -1, like, it's pretty unlikely that you're actually going to succeed on playing the Purple Sun. I know some of you may have been playing against people who like got the Crown Spine out on your turn like every single time, or the Purple Sun, and you don't believe me, but like, that's just what the numbers say. And then yeah, the having the +1 during your turn as well, going from a 35% chance up to a 50% chance is a pretty big deal, especially when it has such a big impact on the game. The Tree Lord ability, they what they do is, yeah, it's during your hero phase, you target an awakened wildwood, and then it can hit all enemies in combat range. For every enemy unit that is in range, I say all enemies, it's all enemy units. So each unit is targeted once. You pick one awakened wildwood for this. Um, for each unit that's there, it's about 1.67 damage. It's the D3 roll on a 2-up, you deal that much damage. That's actually not terrible. The problem is this is done on your hero phase, which means that the previous turn your opponent had to charge a unit in and actually fail to kill your awakened wildwood, but still be in combat range with it. This is most likely going to happen when the enemy unit charged actually one of your units that just happened to be next to an awakened wildwood, and then for some reason they positioned their unit so that they were next to the awakened wildwood. It's not going to happen a ton, but when you look at this damage compared to something like whatever that number is, it's essentially the same as Metamorphosis with no damage bonus in terms of the damage, or casting Dwellers Below on a unit with 10 models. Um, that's not terrible, especially because it doesn't take a spell cast. This is just an automatic ability. So something to consider with the Tree Lord Ancient. I called it Tree Lord, but you know what I meant. Tree Lord Ancient. All right, and then the Awakened Wildwood ability, it's on a 4-up, you deal D3 damage. So you have a 50% chance of doing on average 2 damage. So that's 1 damage. Not great. Again, this actually happens during the combat phase, but you can target all the enemy units that are within combat range of the Awakened Wildwood. So if a bunch of units charged in and they're all within combat range of the Awakened Wildwood, you can get, 2 damage or 3 damage on average. So yeah, of course the average is it's spread out over 3 units, but so it's not great. But like I was talking about before, chip damage can help us make up for some of our weaknesses in other areas. All right, now if the opponent doesn't have the chance to unbind, then it's quite a bit better. Oh, I figured out what happened on the other table. I copied. I thought I was pasting it onto the no unbinds table because the number is almost exactly the same. So I bet that's what happened. But this with the opponent, it's the same table, except the opponent doesn't have a chance to unbind. So our odds of casting are quite a bit better. And that means our damage is better. I'll do the zoom out again. Um, and actually, maybe we can compare the damage as well. If they can both fit on the screen at the same time, they can. Sorry, Purple Sun down here. Um, I know I can hide this. There we go. So The dwellers below against 20 models, you're gaining about a point of damage per factor factor that you change, whether you're -1 or +1 or whatever, with comparison to the opponent having a chance to unbind. That's a pretty big deal. That makes it like this no unbinds table is kind of what I used to think of spells as, like just a chance to cast it. But really, when you factor in the chance to unbind as well, it makes spells like quite a bit worse. Metamorphosis goes to 2.3 compared to 1.79, so about a little over half a point better worth of damage. So that's pretty good. And then on average, if you're hitting 2 units with Unleash Swarm of Spites, you're dealing about 2 damage instead of 1.5. Not a huge improvement, but it definitely looks better than the numbers we were dealing with before. And then, yeah, Dwellers Below against 10 models with no bonus to cast, you're looking at about 2 damage on average. That's not great. Um, yeah, still not great. And actually, the way this idea started for this video was I wanted to see how the damage compared to shooting damage because they are kind of comparable. We're talking about dealing consistent damage at range. This is mortal damage, but I did include our shooting down here. The the figuring out the probabilities for the casting sent me on a rabbit hole. So you guys got to participate with that in that with me. But now we're going to take a look at the shooting down here. So um, let me go ahead and zoom back in, make it a little bit easier. I'm going to squeeze this column down so everything fits down here. And now the um, the difference becomes pretty clear. So a lot of these spells are dueling around like 2 damage on the higher end. And that's pretty much what Gossamed Archers and Kurnoth Bowhunters can do against something that has a 2-up save, which is usually a 3-up save with a all-out defense. So that's not that great. That's really not very good. Um, and when we look at the high end of what the Gossamed Archers and Kurnoth Bowhunters can do, they're dealing about 5.5 or 6+ damage, 6.25 damage. And none of the spells can really compete with that. You could look at, we're looking at, you give Alariel +1 to cast, and the opponent doesn't have a chance to unbind. Then yeah, she can deal 7 mortal damage on average with Dwellers Below and Metamorphosis. So she can surpass that compared to the 6-up save, but it's not super likely to happen. Usually your opponent will have an unbind. So let's go ahead and hide the no unbinds table. And this is kind of the last thing we're looking at here. So if you're still here, I appreciate you sticking with me through this. Really wanted to explore all of this. So you give Alariel a +1 to cast, and she's targeting Metamorphosis, and Dwellers Below against 20 models. Yeah, she can do 6 damage. Like, that's pretty impressive, actually. She's doing almost exactly the same damage as Kurnoth Bowhunters against a 6-up save. And it's mortal damage, so she can be targeting something that has a 3-up save or a 2-up save even, and getting quite a bit of damage through. So yeah, not as bad as I thought, actually, when you think about it that way. Warsong Revenant also has 2 spell casts, so let's do the same thing. If you've got Spellsinger on him, so you cast Unleash Swarm of Spites, and let's say you got 2 units you can target. Usually you'll probably have one, but maybe you do a Tree Song combo, so you can get both of them. And then Dwellers Below. Dwellers Below actually, I was kind of knocking on it, but it actually makes up for quite a bit of the damage, especially when you consider like quite a few of our spellcasters have 2 or 3 spells that they can cast. So it can really help out quite a bit. So yeah, we're looking at almost 4 damage on average. Um, Not terrible, even with your opponent having a chance to unbind. Best case scenario, Warsong Revenant um, hitting 3 units with his War Scroll spell and hitting 20 models with Dwellers Below. 6.8, that's almost 7 mortal damage. That's comparable to an unreinforced unit of Kurnoth bows. They cost 200 points and the Warsong Revenant costs 210. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of the best scenario for him, for the Warsong Revenant, but it's also kind of the best scenario for the Kurnoth bows because they're going up against a 6-up save. So um, you could give them +1 to hit and +1 to wound. But yeah, interesting, kind of enlightening. Actually, when I was preparing this video, I was kind of a little disappointed with the damage from the damage output that magic is capable of. But when I think about casting two spells, um, it actually does kind of compare to, around Karnath's and Gossamid's targeting like a 3-up or a 4-up save. So it's not entirely terrible. Again, why I'm an advocate for the +1 to cast on the spell singer and stuff. Um, let's say you don't have the +1 to cast. You do Unleash Swarm of Spites against that hits 2 units, and you do Dwellers Below, but you're only hitting 10 models. It's still like 3 damage. Yeah, that's comparable with Kurnoth Hunters against a 3-up save. So yeah, not bad. The Warsong Revenant actually capable of doing some pretty good damage. Um, chip damage, of course. Like I said before, I don't want to oversell it. I was pretty disappointed before I started recording with the damage output, but it's actually not that bad looking at it together. So that's it. I did promise this was going to be a deep dive, and man, this was a deep dive. So yeah, like I said, if you're sticking with it, really appreciate you sticking through. Thanks for watching. Let me know your comments in the comments below, your thoughts on anything that I shared, how this affects your thinking about casting spells. Maybe I'm way off on one of these spells, or something like that. Let me know your thoughts on that. Maybe I did the math wrong. If I did, I'm just going to delete it, and there goes the channel. No, I'm just kidding. I can take criticism. So, but yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you in the next one.